Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. And seeing as today is October 28th, 2024, I thought to myself, hey, what better time than now, before we put this month to bed, to go back and take a quick look at the second album, October, by Irish juggernaut that is known as U2. Now, U2 are a band that I have brought to this channel a couple times in the past. U2 are a band that I would consider myself to be somewhat of a casual fan of. I don't, nor have I ever tried to pass myself off as being any sort of a diehard. Now, my best friend Tim, who lives out in California, he is about as big a U2 freak as you will ever find, and he has been ever since the band released its album Achtung Baby back in 1991. So this is a band that, despite the fact that I'm a sort of a casual fan of, this is a band that definitely represents one of the soundtracks of my youth, especially my adolescent years, cruising around with my friend Tim in his car. This was one of the bands that we were inevitably listening to as we drove around our little Mayberry. And despite the fact that this was a band that I spent a tremendous amount of my youth listening to, this was a band that for a long time I really didn't have a ton of use for. I had sort of a very remedial knowledge of their catalog. It was basically until 2020, during the COVID pandemic, that I really sort of dove deep into this band's catalog, because during the COVID pandemic, based on what I do for a living, I was out of work for about 9 weeks, and I spent most of my COVID vacation just listening to music. I went back and listened to music that I hadn't listened to in a long time, some stuff that I'd never listened to, and some stuff that I was interested in becoming more familiar with, which is sort of where the U2 catalog sort of fell into. This was then a band that I grew up listening to with my best friend, and a band that I was sort of interested in learning more about. And for the sake of a project that I was working on previously to the life of Archaic Records, I went back and decided to rank the catalog of U2, and therefore I had to go back and learn more about their catalog. So I listened to the band's catalog in chronological order, and that was really where I sort of familiarized myself more with some of the stuff that I was, at least before then, unfamiliar with. Now, this album, October, is an album that I was somewhat familiar with before I really sort of dug deep into the band's catalog. This is an album, I would say, as a casual fan, is probably my second favorite record in the band's catalog, or at least it was when I ranked the studio albums of U2 on this channel a couple of months ago. That video is up and available if you are so interested. I don't understand why you would be, but if you are, it is easily accessible. This is my second favorite album in the U2 catalog, behind only the band's debut album, Boy, which came out in 1980. Now, I'm not saying that as if I'm one of those people who says that U2's early catalog was the only good music they ever made, because I absolutely do not believe that that is true. In fact, my third favorite album in U2's catalog was Pop from 1997, so I don't think that I fit into that sort of stereotype as the cynical U2 fan, but I do think that the band's first two albums are their best. For me, my favorite window of music is that time frame between 1976 and 1984, punk rock, post-punk, and into early new wave. And these two U2 albums, and the one that followed these two, War, I think all three of these albums fit very nicely into that sort of time frame. This is an album that, for me, I go back and listen to with about as much regularity as anything in the U2 catalog, with the exception of Boy, which to me is one of the greatest debut albums of all time. Now, let's not get let's not get crazy. It's not the greatest debut album of all time. That would be the 1984 self-titled debut album by the Smiths. I think we can all agree on that. I think universally that is an accepted fact. But I think that the album Boy by U2 is a remarkable accomplishment. So when the band began working on their follow-up album October, it is understandable that they were feeling a lot of sort of self-imposed pressure. They wanted to make an album that lived up to not only the artistic success of Boy, but also the critical and commercial success. And this album represents a very interesting and tumultuous time in the band's career. I think one of the most interesting times in the band's career, at least in my opinion. I mean, when this album was in its pre-infancy, U2 were on tour in the United States. I believe it was in Portland, Oregon, when somebody broke into their backstage area and basically lifted a briefcase that had some of the early workings of what was going to be the band's second album. Now, of course, this left the band in a state of panic. Understandably, they had to basically start this album from scratch, and when they returned home to Dublin, Ireland, from that U.S. tour, they basically sequestered themselves away in the music room at their old school, Mount Temple, where they began rehashing and reworking some of the ideas for the songs that they had previously begun working on. It got to the point to where they were really starting to bump up against a deadline, and at a certain point in time, Bono himself says that he basically locked himself in a room and forced himself to basically write lyrics until the record was done. Now, I wish that I was capable of doing something like that. I wish that I was capable of sitting down and making a conscious decision that I'm going to just write something and have it turn out as good as I think the lyrics on this record turn out. Now, of course, during the recording process of this record, the band hit another sort of speed bump when it was decided by the band's guitarist, The Edge, that he was having a hard time sort of reconciling his faith with the rock and roll lifestyle. And he had sort of confided in the band's singer Bono that he was considering leaving the band and dedicating his life to service. And as an act of friendship and solidarity, Bono also agreed to leave the band if that was the decision that The Edge ended up making. So at a certain point in time, Bono and The Edge apparently had decided to leave the band, and they had called a meeting with the band's other two members, the rhythm section, Adam Clayton and Larry Mullen Jr., as well as the October album producer, Steve Lillywhite, and the band's manager, Paul McGuinness, where they sat down and they basically explained to them their decision that they were going to leave the band based on their faith. And it was Steve Lillywhite who, in a way, I think sort of saved the band by posing the question, wouldn't it be better to have a platform such as a successful rock band to sort of spread the word of your faith rather than just solely being members of, a church? And Paul McGuinness, the band's manager, he approached this topic in a much more practical manner, reminding the band that they had gigs booked, that there were contracts that had been signed, and of course it was his famous quote saying, hey, if God had something to say about this tour, he probably should have raised his hand a little bit earlier. So the band, of course, decides to continue on and eventually becomes one of the biggest bands in the world. And it's always interesting to me to think back of what would have happened to U2 had they broken up just after they released the Boy album. Obviously, this band goes on to become the biggest band of its generation, the biggest band of the 1980s, the biggest band of my youth. And it's interesting to think about what would have happened to this band had they just basically released one album and retired. I mean, they basically would have become another Haircut 100. Nobody wants that. Nobody asked for that. Anyway, the band continued on, and they ended up releasing the second album, October, on October 12th, 1981. As I mentioned before, this is my second favorite album in the U2 catalog. It is sonically similar to Boy in a lot of ways. Lyrically, this album goes in a much different direction than Boy does. Now, I say that this album is sonically similar to Boy, which it is, but U2 are one of those bands that, this is a band that never repeats themselves. They continue moving forward. So although it is Boy-ish, it's definitely a step away from Boy sonically. Of course, this record was produced by Steve Lillywhite, so the production on this record is perfect. Steve Lillywhite is pretty much my favorite producer of all time, based on mostly his work with the big guy, Mr. Stephen Patrick Morrissey. And As a sophomore album, I think that this album is excellent. Like I said before, I think that this is an overlooked album, an underrated album, if you will, in U2's catalog. Now, again, let's just not lose our heads. This is by no means the best sophomore album of all time, which would be Meat is Murder by the greatest band of all time, the Smiths, but it is a very respectable sophomore album. Of course, the album's artwork is an album cover that I actually really like. Now, it's nowhere near as striking as the album cover for the record before this, Boy, which, I mean, that album cover is just perfect. It's beautiful. The album cover for this one, October, is definitely not as striking, although this album cover did become a big point of contention with the band and their label, Island Records. Island Records hated this album cover. They didn't want anything to do with it. They basically thought that anything would be a better album cover than this one. But what the band wanted to do with the album cover was they wanted to convey something very Irish. They wanted to convey Irishness. And they thought that them sitting basically in the Dublin docks was something that conveyed Irishness. Now, I've read in the past that this became a big point of contention between the band and the record label, and this was a hill that the band were really willing to die on. Now, I've read that it wasn't so much that it was just this album cover in particular, that they were so much in love with this particular photograph, but it just became basically an issue of control. The band felt like if they were going to cave into the record label when it came to something like this, that would snowball, and eventually the band would end up giving up much more important creative control than something like, an album cover. And it was in the band's contract that they had full control of the album covers anyway, so this was the one that they went with. I actually like it. I mean, it's not quite as striking as the Boy album cover, but you got to admit that there's something pretty striking about Adam Clayton's Platinum Puff. Anyway, like I said, this album was produced by Steve Lillywhite. It is just wonderfully produced. I would take Steve Lillywhite over Brian Eno every day as a producer. I'm not just saying that to be Johnny Obscure. That is the truth. I think the stuff that Steve Lillywhite produced with U2 sounds miles better than the stuff that was produced by Brian Eno, at least in my opinion. Anyway, the first song on this record is a song called Gloria. I think it's easily the most well-known song on this record. I mean, I'm kind of going out on a limb there, aren't I? Because it's obviously the most well-known song. You get it? That was the joke. You understand? Anyway, I love this song. As generic as it sounds, I love this song. Actually, really, there really isn't that much on this album that I don't like. Now, like I said, this is sort of a step back from Boy, in my opinion, but there really isn't a bad song on this entire album. I mean, there's not a bad second on Boy, so this one is not that far behind it, but I love the song Gloria. Apparently, the lyrics in the verse, or in the chorus, I should say, come from a Gregorian chant in Latin, which are translated as God, glory in you, God, glory, joy. This song sort of sets the tone for a record that is sort of soaked in the band's faith. According to things I've read about, Bono was... this was sort of an act of defiance with him when it came to the lyrics on this album. He thought that singing about something that was as uncool as Christianity in the sort of rock ethos was this band's own sort of way of, being rebellious. His faith was something that he was very proud of. It was not something that he was going to hide from. And it becomes a theme throughout basically this entire album. I love the song Gloria. I think it is as good a song as pretty much anything that you would find on Boy. I think it sets the tone for a great record. I think it is one of the high points of the record. I love the video, also for the song Gloria. The next song after that is a song called I Fall Down, which is another song I really like. Now, like I said before, I think that this is one of the most underrated, underappreciated albums in U2's catalog. There's a lot of songs on this record that are great that you just never hear about. anymore at all. And I Fall Down is one of those songs. I really like this song a lot. To me, this song is about somebody that is struggling with some sort of serious ailment, whether it's an illness or depression or social anxiety, and they're always sort of looking for an escape. I feel like that this is a person that sets a very unreasonably high expectation for themselves, and therefore this is somebody that often feels as if they are letting themselves down. This song is very sort of anxious. It's something that I find to be relatable, if that is in fact what the song is all about. I love the song I Fall Down. Again, it's one of my favorite songs on this record. I think it's a relatively deep track in U2's catalog. The next song after that is a very interesting song in the U2 catalog, at least in my sort of casual perception of this band. That is the song I Threw a Brick Through a Window, which is apparently a song about self-loathing. Now, the narrator in this song is walking along, and they are sort of confronted with their own reflection in a window. And based on their sort of low self-opinion, they are just aghast when they see their own reflection in this window. So what this person does is they pick up a rock and they chuck it through the window because they just can't even deal with looking at themselves. Now, maybe back in 1981, Bono was a much more modest, humble type of person than he is today. Because if there's one thing that I do not associate with Bono, and I'm a casual fan, I'm not saying this to throw bricks at the guy, get it? Yeah. But I don't associate Bono with self-loathing. I associate Bono with having a relatively healthy ego. I mean, this guy has to check his self-image at the airport. A more appropriate title for this song, I think, based on the Bono that I'm at least familiar with, would be I Jizzed on a Window. Get it? Get it? Because he saw himself and he was so in love with himself that he decided to whip it out right there and tug it. Man, that's comedy. That would be a much more appropriate title for this song, in my opinion. I love this song. I love the song I Threw a Brick Through a Window. Apparently, if you go back and you read up some of the stuff about the October album, which when I went back and I listened to the U2 catalog in its chronology, that's one thing that I did do was, as I reached an album, I tried to either watch a documentary about it or go back and watch interviews with the band during this period or read something about it. And that's one thing I read about this particular song was this song has a relatively complicated drum beat. And I'm one of those people, I'll tell you right now, that I actually really like the U2 rhythm section of Adam Clayton and Larry Mullen Jr. I think that they are actually somewhat underappreciated. I've heard a lot of people that are sort of elitists and rock snobs sort of, criticize their rhythm section as being pretty weak. I sort of disagree with that. I really like Adam Clayton and Larry Mullen Jr. I mean, the biggest culprit of that of all time that I've ever heard is Henry Rollins, who I'm a fan of, but I mean, Henry Rollins just, he digs a grave for Larry Mullen Jr. and Adam Clayton. But one thing I did read about this song in particular was this was a song that Larry Mullen Jr. just could not get the hang of in the studio, and it began to sort of slow things down a little bit. So one either late night or early morning, the Edge sort of sneaks into the studio and he records some of the drum track in order to get the recording process up and rolling again. And Larry Mullen Jr., who, what I know about him is that he is a very proud man. I'm sure he took that as something of an affront. Now, I'm sure he didn't get his feelings hurt. Larry Mullen Jr. doesn't seem like a feelings hurt kind of guy, but I'm assuming he probably took this as an affront, and he decided that he really needed to buckle down and master his craft, especially when it came to this song. I love this song. I think the subject matter is comical as a U2 song, but I love the song, and I love the rhythm track on this section. The next song after that is a song called Rejoice. This is... that's tough. I'm going to say this is probably my favorite song on this record, honestly. I love the guitar. on this song. Apparently, this song is about crumbling infrastructure and the struggle of everyday life. But the narrator decides that instead of dwelling on all the negativity around him, that he's going to approach life in a different way by celebrating what is positive in the world. And again, this is another one of those songs that not so subtly praises God. I've often heard this song sort of compared to I Will Follow off of the band's first album. Maybe that's why I like this song so much. This is, it's a tough one. Probably my favorite song on this record. It is very unsubtly religious. I love the lyric. It has one of my favorite lyrics on the entire album, which is, I can't change the world, but I can change the world in me. Amen, brother. That is not an easy undertaking, to decide to change yourself and the way that you live in the world. So I totally relate to that lyric. I love that lyric. It's probably one of my favorite lyrics on the album. I love the song Rejoice. After that is a song called Fire. Again, a very underrated song in U2's catalog. Is this a deep cut? I think it is. I think this is a deep cut. I think actually a lot of the album tracks off of October are deep cuts because this album is just so underappreciated in terms of the band's catalog at this point in time. Apparently, now I've read that this song is about the Book of Revelations. Whether that's true or not, I'm not exactly sure, but that is the consensus of things I've read about this song. I haven't really seen or heard the band talk about the song Fire that much, but apparently it is about the Book of Revelations. I love this song. It is a very underrated song on this record. I would say, maybe top 3, but it closes out side 1. Great song. I love the song Fire. The next song after that starts off side 2 on somewhat of a somber note. This is a song called Tomorrow. I read an interview with Bono when I was going back and listening to this album in its entirety as part of the catalog. And in the interview, Bono talked about how when he originally wrote this song, he found the lyrics to be very unimpressive. He thought it was a little bit bland. He thought it was generic. He thought it was actually a little bit beneath him as a songwriter. But later on, he sort of discovered that this song was actually about his mother's funeral. Now, of course, it's well documented. This is not something that I was really super aware of until I read Bono's book last year that his mother passed away when he was only 14 years old, which must have just been absolutely devastating. It's something I can't even wrap my mind around. I thought the parts in Bono's book... First off, Bono's book is incredible. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend that you read it. But when he goes back and he talks about this era of his life when his mother passed away and how incredibly difficult it was, I can't even imagine what it must have been like to lose your mother at 14 years of age. But the song is heartbreaking. It's beautiful. And again, this is another one of those songs on the record that is very soaked in his faith, because at the end of the day, you sort of get the feeling that the narrator in this song is helped through this just unbelievably tragic loss with the help of his faith. And, God bless you. No pun intended. I mean, I love this song. It's heartbreaking. I mean, it's a very sad song. It starts off side 2 with a little bit of a kick in the seeds, if you know what I mean, but it is awesome. Actually, I don't know if this is necessarily one of my favorite songs on the record, but kind of knowing what the song is about makes it one of my... Sonically, it's not my favorite song on the record, but listening to and knowing what the lyrics are all about make it one of my favorite songs. I can't even imagine what it must have been like to lose your mother at 14 years old. The next song after that is the title track, October. A song I like. To me, this is honestly probably the weakest song on the record, at least in my opinion. Not to say that it's a bad song, because I don't think that there's a bad song on the album October, but to me this is probably my least favorite. But apparently this song is it's referring to how the members of U2 believe that life in the early 80s was a direct result from the industrial boom during the previous 2 decades and the negative impact that possibly had on the world as a whole. I saw an interview with Bono that was filmed right around this time, and he was talking sort of about the arrogance of man, and even back in 1981, our obsession with industry and technology, and basically saying, hey, sometimes we aren't necessarily as smart as we think we are. We don't necessarily consider the repercussions of our actions. I like the song. Like I said, it's probably my least favorite song on the album, but it's my favorite month of the year. And this song sort of, it has that sort of feel to it also, where you kind of get, it's melancholy. It kind of feels like a changing of the seasons sonically. But I like the song. It's not my favorite, but the next song after that is a song called With a Shout. I really like this song a lot. I especially really like the drum intro on this song, another underrated song on this album. This is sort of, to me, this is kind of an anti-war sort of anthem. To me, I've also, or not to me, but I've read also that this song had to do with the conflict in the Middle East. Well, at least those days are behind us. Get it? I love this song, though. The lyrics, or the vocals on this song are just bleak and desperate. I love the lyrics. Again, I love the rhythm track on this record. You know, Adam Clayton and Larry Mullen Jr., to me, they don't get enough credit for being as good a rhythm section as they are now. They're not Mike Joyce and Andy Rourke. But then again, nobody is accusing him of that, are they? The next song after that is a song called Stranger in a Strange Land. Another song that I would say is a very underrated sort of deep cut in U2's catalog. This song, I've read, this song is about division, basically. I've heard people use the example of a divided Germany back in this time, the Cold War Germany, and also the British occupation of Northern Ireland. I read a thing one time where Bono talked about being in Berlin and climbing to the top of the Berlin Wall and looking over into East Germany and seeing a soldier that was roughly his age, probably 20 or 21 years old at the time, if I'm not misjudging Bono's age, and how weird it must have felt to live in a divided country where you are a stranger in a strange land. Also, I think people have used the sort of example of Northern Ireland being occupied by Britain. I think that that's probably a more appropriate example when it comes to U2 being an Irish band, but I love the song Stranger in a Strange Land. As a kid who grew up in a small town where I was an outcast, I often referred to myself as a stranger in a strange land. Not to be clever or funny, but that's just literally the way that it felt. The next song after that is the song Scarlet. This is a cool song. Basically just has one lyric that they repeat, which is rejoice. This is a very, just superficially, this is just a very cool song. It has an awesome instrumental track. I think that you would be in complete denial if you didn't admit that this song had an obvious Joy Division influence. To me, it sounds like Transmission by Joy Division. I mean, which is something I'm sure that the band wouldn't even deny, because Joy Division were such a huge influence on everybody around this same time. But I love this song, Scarlet. Instrumentally, it's probably one of my favorite tracks on the record. I'm a huge Joy Division fan. I'm sure most people of our age or our generation are. The album closes out with a song called Is That All? Another instrumental track that's one of my favorite on this record. I've always thought that this song was, based on the fact that this album is so heavily soaked in Christianity and in faith, I've always thought that this song was a little bit of a shout out to God. But somebody pointed out to me, actually not that long ago, that when Mark David Chapman approached John Lennon outside of his apartment in New York to have his album signed, not too long before John Lennon returned and was shot and killed by Mark David Chapman, that John Lennon said to him, after signing his album, he said, "Is that all? Is that all you want from me?" And I'm always, since I've had that pointed out to me, I've always wondered if this is what that song is referring to. It probably is in some way, shape, or form, but I've always thought of this song more as being more of a religious song, but until somebody pointed that out to me, and I looked it up, and it was true that is supposedly what Mark David Chapman said that John Lennon had said to him. I find that to be a very interesting sort of subtext to this song, but it is a great way to close out the album. Again, I really like this song a lot. This is an album that I just could not possibly recommend enough. To me, this album is probably about 85-90% Jug certified, so if you haven't gone back and listened to the second album by the Irish juggernaut that is known as U2, October, I would highly recommend it. And you only got a few more days until the month is over, so why not just do it now? Do it now! Apparently, according to things I've read also about the band and this era of the band's career, when they returned home to Ireland following this album's tour cycle, a meeting was held by the brass at Island Records in regards to the future of U2, because this album was seen as being somewhat of a commercial and artistic flop, especially a commercial flop. Apparently this band basically made no money off of this record, apparently barely had enough money to get themselves home. It's questioned whether or not they even had enough money to pay their crew at the end of the tour. But at the end of the day, at the last minute, the brass at Island Records decided to give the band, as they said, one more go at it. And, of course, that turned out to be a pretty wise decision by the brass at Island Records, because the album that would follow this one, War, which was awesome also, is an album that sort of began the band's trajectory into launching themselves into being the biggest band and probably one of the most lucrative bands of the 1980s. So it was certainly a wise decision by Island Records to give this band another go at it, despite the fact that this album was sort of a commercial disappointment. To me, this album is an artistic accomplishment. I love this record. As I said before, I actually think that this record is better than War, which is nothing to sneeze at either. War is probably my fourth favorite record in the U2 catalog after Pop. I think Pop is just awesome. I don't understand why they've totally distanced themselves from Pop. As far as when you go see them live now, they don't play anything off of Pop, and man, I love that record. They don't really play much off of October anymore either, I don't think. Not that I'm aware of. Anyway, man, go back and check out the band's second album, October, before the end of the month. I think that you will not be too disappointed. It's my favorite month of the year, my second favorite album in the U2 catalog. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Check back most weeks for Morrissey Monday, a celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And unless I'm mistaken, I think that's just about going to do her. So until next time, my friends, talk to you then.